Well, now that we've set up, welcome to this panel discussion for this morning. See, we've got a good-sized audience. It's quite bright up here. We can't see very much, but okay, we're going to be talking about IoT. What do telcos have to offer? I'm Martin Warwick. I'm the editor-in-chief of TelecomTV. Do a lot of this, and my panel here, some of whom I've met before and one guy I haven't met before, but we seem to be quite good friends. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves to you and talk about their interest and position in IoT before we begin the debate itself. So let me start. Gentleman on my right, would you introduce yourself and say what you're going to say?
Good afternoon, Martin. My name is Guy Summers. I'm head of IoT device products at Telefónica Global, which means I'm responsible for all of our SIM cards and devices, device management services and application services at the global market level. And we provide solutions to all of our national operating businesses. And of course, Telefónica are making huge investments in networks and platforms and solutions for IoT. And that's my interest here today.
Thank you. Sir.
So I'm William Webb. I am the CEO of the Weightless SIG. Weightless is a not-for-profit standards organisation set up very much like Bluetooth, and hence the name SIG, like the Bluetooth SIG. And it was set up to deliver an open standard for wide area Internet of Things connectivity. Prior to that, actually, I was one of the founders of Newell. Some of you may know that company, which developed a technology for Internet of Things, which became part of what Weightless is now. And I'm trying to achieve some kind of open standard harmonization in the Internet of Things space so that we can have a single standard like we do for Bluetooth for Internet of Things. Thank you, Martin.
Last but by no means least.
Absolutely. Matt Hatton, so I'm the founder and CEO of Makino Research. So we're a specialist research and consulting firm who look at IoT, M2M, telematics, however you want to refer to it. We provide strategic advisory services to companies across the IoT value chain, so supply side in terms of large vendors and telcos, through to enterprises that are deploying IoT. So, potted version.
Thank you very much indeed. Let's get into this. Matt, I'm going to start with you. Would do.
Absolutely.
As you're an analyst.
What am I going to have to defend, Martin?
You're going to, well, first of all, do people know how long it takes to count to 1 million? Shall I tell you, if you count a second, 1, 2, 3, and if you could get to 99,999 in a second, it would take you 4 days and nights without stopping for anything to count to 1 million. So that's how big 1 million is. Let's have a look at a few figures that have been bandied around for IoT from different research houses and so on. According to Gartner, there are going to be 6.4 billion connected devices in use this year, up by 30% on 2015, and they predict that the number will rise to 20 billion devices by 2020. On the other hand, others say that it will be even more than that, surprisingly enough, which is an enormous amount. So Matt, do we believe what is being peddled to us in terms of the number of interconnected IoT type devices that are out there and will be out there?
Well, as a forecast peddler, I am somewhat obliged to say yes.
I thought you might.
It's an involved process forecasting the IoT. It's a very complicated thing, a lot of moving parts, a lot of different use cases, a lot of different methodologies for working out how many of these devices are out there. But it's a critical thing to do, right? You've got to understand what the market opportunity is, market size. And our numbers say around about 5 billion connected devices now, something like 25 billion in 2025. And you're talking about all sorts of technologies, you're talking about all sorts of sensors and devices. This isn't 25 billion cellular connected devices. The IoT is a broad thing. It includes an awful lot of different use cases. So, you know, any numbers of, we could do with some heating sensors in this room today. That would be a useful thing, but it turns out we don't have that. But those kind of sensors, actuators, there's going to be a lot of them to fulfill all of these weird and wonderful applications that we know of as the IoT. So, in answer to your question, yes, we do believe in those sorts of numbers.
Even though the forecasts are extremely variable up and down? They seem to be very...
Well, we particularly believe in one set of numbers, which are produced by a wonderful research firm called Makino Research. So I can talk to anybody about that if they're interested. But you know, order of magnitude along the same lines as some of the other things that you've been talking about.
Okay, thank you. Now let's move to a network operator, Telefónica Digital. How important is IoT now to Telefónica Digital? Whereabouts are you with the technology and with the network, and how important do you think it's going to be?
Well, I mean, we have been in the market for cellular machine-to-machine for many years already, over 10 years, and we have over 12 million connected devices. But I kind of take issue a little bit with this focus on the number of connected devices. I'm not actually sure that's the important thing at the moment. I mean, we've had these headlines around for many years to draw attention to the industry. But actually, it's a bit like when we launched GPRS 12, 14 years ago as mobile network operators. We're at the kind of a nexus of a technology transition which was destined to transform businesses. And that's the same for IoT today. So we're going to see lots and lots of huge varieties, as Matt says, of different types of connected devices. But most importantly, a kind of a whole change in the way in which businesses operate. And that's a transformation that's important to us. In order to do that, we have to build the technologies, we have to create the right kind of cost base for the solutions, the right kind of battery life, all those kind of things to enable the market. And we're right at the point now, in the next couple of years, where those things will pay off and we can start to reap the benefits from that. But it is going to be hugely important.
Can I jump in and agree? Because in a way, the Internet of Things isn't really the Internet of devices. Those things, in a way, are business processes. They're user experiences. It's about the underlying experience or the underlying outcome, if you like, that's actually the beneficial and important thing about IoT, rather than the number of devices that you're connecting.
And I think it's actually inherently unforecastable. So my analogy is with mobile data. So back in 2000, everyone predicted mobile data would be a great thing, and the mobile operators paid 20 billion plus pounds for spectrum. And nothing happened, really, until 2007. Almost no mobile data usage whatsoever. And then everything changed on April 2007. The iPhone was launched, and mobile data went through the roof and continues to go through the roof in a way that is vastly, vastly bigger than anyone ever expected in 2000. And I think exactly the same thing will happen with the Internet of Things. We'll bumble along in a way that's acceptable, but nothing dramatic. And then something will happen, some trigger event will happen, and things will be dramatically bigger than we ever expected. And the problem is, what is that trigger event and when is it going to happen? And I think it's inherently unknowable. But my take would be the advent of a very low-cost chip that is ubiquitous, that you can drop into any device. And every manufacturer thinks, I'll just put one of those in my device. It may never be used, but that device may never connect, but it costs less than $1. And if I can drop that in, then it's future-proof, and actually it might be quite valuable. And then suddenly, the world changes dramatically.
Matt, you're either yawning or trying to interject.
No. Well, no, it's early days yet. I'm going to disagree a little bit, just to keep things interesting, because we like to have a bit of to and fro. The problem is we kind of lump together lots and lots of different things under this umbrella of IoT, and actually there will be a few triggers that will help to kickstart a few markets, and those will happen at different times, and they will be different triggers depending on which market it is you're talking about, because the market for smart metering is a very different one from the market for connected car or the market for, I don't know, consumer electronics, you name it. They all have very different dynamics, and there will be different triggers. So this idea of incredibly cheap sensors that you can scatter like dust and do whatever you will with. Yes, all very well for things like environmental sensing. Yes, absolutely. I see that as a big trigger. But for something like connected car, does it really help particularly? Well, maybe in certain circumstances, but in others maybe not. So we have to also allow for a bit of diversity in the space as well.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It is such a broad church of different things.
No, I think in one sense you're quite right that in consumer services, at the very least, we haven't quite seen the spark yet. So what Matt is saying is what we experience on a day-to-day basis. You know, the automotive industry treats IoT completely differently to the metering industry, to smart cities, to smart retail, and each of those industry segments has their own way and their own benefits and values of adopting the technology. Yeah. But certainly on the consumer side, the only real entry point we have at the moment is smart home. around a hub and around connected devices. And there are a huge variety of fantastic applications out there, light bulbs and switches, all that kind of stuff. But that whole kind of mass adoption in the consumer market, I think hasn't quite started yet. And that is something that it'll be interesting to see quite where the entry point is there.
But in a way, IoT in itself is a very unhelpful term. I mean, we know that we can run events with IoT names on, and if you come to those events, the three of us will be here, and probably a bunch of other people, and we know that's going to happen, and it's a useful umbrella term for us to talk about what we do. But when it comes to the actual end users, they don't think about IoT in the slightest, and this is just a way of using connectivity, a way of using data processing and data management and so on to achieve a particular objective. So, diversity. Well, I've made my point about diversity. I think we leave it there.
Okay, let's look at the markets. You mentioned that there are a great many of them. There are going to be a great many of them. Which do you think, Guy, is going to be the most important in the immediate future?
I mean, well, we already see automotive leading the way in terms of connected car, driverless cars, that whole kind of technology adoption around automotive. They're at the forefront of using high bandwidth LTE services for infotainment. The stuff that Tesla is doing is absolutely amazing with the in-car experience. So I think they're certainly pushing the bounds in terms of the service, the offer to the customer, offer to the consumer. So that's probably the most advanced market that we see. Smart metering, much duller in terms of the customer experience. But there's nothing
any
nothing
smart
really.
Meter manufacturers in the audience? No, good, okay. You got away with that one.
It's a great business, very lucrative. It's very important, but there's not a lot for the consumer in there at this stage. But in terms of volumes of connections, that is by far and away. In the UK, in the next 5 years, there'll be over 50 million connected endpoints. That's just one country. And that's gas, water, electricity. So certainly in terms of volume and in terms of driving the cost base down for the technology, that's a very important market in smart metering, yes.
Before we come to talk about what telcos have to offer in the IoT space, let's just have a quick word about standards. Standards inevitably, usually, follow the introduction of a new technology. William, this one's for you, really.
Yeah.
The majority of IoT devices require extremely low power and need to communicate only occasionally, infrequently. So what do you think is the best option for deployment under those circumstances? And what about the new standards that are being created now? Where are you with them, and are they being accepted across the board, or are you a voice in the wilderness amongst others?
So the first point I'd make actually is for wireless connectivity, there are no successful wireless solutions that are not open standards. So everything we use today, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, cellular, TV, radio, all of it is an open standard. I cannot think of a single successful proprietary wireless technology. And I can't think of any reason why the Internet of Things would be different. And indeed, actually, because of its diversity, it has even stronger needs for open standards. What we actually see today is a lot of proprietary technologies out there. And I cannot believe that those are going to continue along their current trajectory. Either they become open standards or they fall by the wayside when an open standard gains particular credibility. The other point I'd make is, in each of our different types of connectivity, there is one dominant open standard. So for personal communications, it's Bluetooth. We don't argue about whether it's Bluetooth or something else, it's always Bluetooth. For our home connectivity, it's Wi-Fi. For wide area, it's cellular now. Yes, there's 2G, 3G, 4G, but they are converging ever more so on one standard from 3GPP. For the Internet of Things, I think we are going to also converge. Now, to Matt's point that there is some diversity there may be room for a couple of standards, but I can't see much more than that, because the economies of scale and the dynamics of the market are such that once one gets its head above the others, everyone says, that's the winner. They all pile into that one, and it propels it stratospherically. So it seems to me that we will have either one or two open standards that drive things forward, and at the moment, perhaps we might deduce that one will be a licensed standard that the mobile operators can deploy in their licensed spectrum, and the other will be an unlicensed standard that mobile operators might also choose to deploy in the same way that they deploy Wi-Fi, or might be deployed by other players, either operators or campus owners or something like that. That's where I think we'll get to, and I think the licensed one will be a 3GPP standard, probably narrowband IoT. In the unlicensed space, there is only one standard at the moment, which is the one I represent, Weightless. There are no other open standards in that space. So my hope, of course, and I'm rather biased on this, is that it'll end up being Weightless in unlicensed spectrum.
We're making an interesting point, but what we've seen with NFV, and I've spent an awful lot of time talking to people with NFV over the past 3.5 years, is we have seen, even though there's a great deal of emphasis on open and open source, there are many standards bodies now emerging. In fact, there's a plethora. They seem to, they're breeding. There's more and more of them all the time, and it can't go on like that. And operators, telcos are already saying that, whoa, there's too many of them here. Do you think there's a danger that the same thing could happen with IoT? I guess from what you've just said, you think not.
Well, there already is too many standards bodies, but many of them exist at different layers in the system. So I was talking specifically about the wireless connectivity element, but there are a range of standards bodies that exist at a sort of protocol layer or similar, and yes, too many of those for sure. Ideally, you just want one that develops the standard that everyone adopts and everyone can link to. And we do need to see some shakeout in that space, and it's always difficult to achieve that. But eventually, sooner or later, one does become somewhat dominant, and then dynamics very quickly drive that to total dominance.
It sort of emerges like the Conservative leader used to.
Yeah, there's a trigger event.
Or the Pope.
Or indeed the Pope.
Yeah, and for example, in mobile operating systems, Android eventually emerged at the point when Google bought it and said it was free. That was the trigger event that effectively propelled what had been one contender amongst many into a position where it became the leading system. Now, of course, we've still got Apple iOS as well, but at least we're converging down to a smaller number of operating systems.
Thank you. Let's move on to the operators, the telcos themselves. Guy, you're obviously one for this, which is why I'm going to ask the question to Matt first.
Naturally. There's a logic there somewhere.
Well, there is. I just want to hear what you're going to say before we talk about Telefónica. What do you think is the difference going to be for IoT? Does IoT have any relevance at all or any application in a fixed line network?
In a fixed line network? I assumed you were going to ask me about mobile operators, so I like a left field question. Okay, yes, absolutely. If you think about anything to do with connected home, almost by definition, fixed line providers will be strong players in anything to do with connected home. We've seen it with AT&T with Digital Life. We see it with a number of other fixed line operators around the world, because you've got that hub within the home that just naturally acts as a connection point for things to do with security or things to do with building automation or whatever. So there's a strong role there. There's a sort of carrier's carrier kind of wholesale role for carrying data, but really IoT doesn't generate that much data in the context of the amount of data generated by iPhones and mobile broadband connectivity and all the lovely tablets that are connected and whatever. So this is a bit of an element there. Maybe more on the traffic prioritization aspects of IoT, because there are going to be some absolutely critical applications, business critical applications, fleet management, supply chain kind of things, and life critical applications in the healthcare space. So there might be some requirements for doing clever things with networks in terms of prioritizing traffic. But I've sort of strayed away a little bit from your core kind of BT equivalent in terms of fixed line. But for them, yeah, it's mostly about connected buildings.
It's an interesting point, because if you look at the internet, none of the providers, either the fixed operators or the mobile operators, really provide internet. They just provide connectivity, and then it's the Facebooks and the eBays and the Googles and everyone else that provides the services around that. And I kind of see the same in the Internet of Things, that actually, yes, the fixed line providers provide the pipe that gets the data back from the home to the cloud, but I can't see them being the entities that provide the Google equivalent or the managed service equivalent for different services. There'll be different providers in each space around that one.
Yes, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm not so sure. I think you're right. There is an application layer which will be quite diverse and quite open and allow innovation and allow players to come in and create solutions. So I certainly agree with that, in the sense that today you see lots of stuff connected over Wi-Fi by the home hub. But I think also you will see telcos and network operators providing services on the hub themselves in a closed environment, in the same way that customers are quite happy to buy TV services from us today, or storage services or DSL services from us today. They'll also want to buy a trusted environment for managing the home security and for managing the thermostat around the home. So I think there's certainly a market there. But I mean, as you said before, it exists at many levels. So there will be based on standards, the ability for people to come in with particular services and particular applications that is going to be quite diverse. But on the fixed line point, I tend to agree that we have a core business which is used by all kinds of IT services for communications, for security, for cloud, which is the backbone of any kind of IT service today. And we're in that market with wireless services, but that's not really an end user service. The way we work in fixed line is in the consumer environment. And then much more widely in the connected cellular market, in the machine-to-machine cellular market.
Well, and the other, I mean, you touched on sort of cloud hosting. I mean, telcos, big hosting businesses typically. So there's a all this data has to be hosted, it has to be managed, it has to be interrogated somewhere, and so that kind of a sort of adjunct to core telco activities there's a significant requirement for that kind of thing within IoT.
Absolutely.
That's how I see it.
Yes, quite right.
And I'd love to see that. My hesitation is if I think back to what the telcos have said they would do, location-based services, smart payments, healthcare, walled garden internet, picture messaging, video calling systems, all of those things were actually delivered by someone else in the end, by Skype or by other entities, because they could move faster without the encumbrance of a huge business with backward compatibility and everything else. And when I think about my Hive home heating system, that has nothing to do with any telco. So I find it hard to see quite how you're going to deliver that.
It is carried over a telco network at some point.
Yeah.
We do have a part to play, but we're not just
BT.
carriers.
Yeah.
There's also the analogy, all the analogies that you mentioned there, I think
Yeah.
were consumer-related services. So yes, I think you're right on the consumer side of things, that the telco has a bit of a problem with converting being the connectivity provider into being the actual service provider. On the enterprise side of things, there's a lot of telecoms operators have very big IT services and basically enterprise service businesses that are pretty successful. Deutsche Telekom, BT, so on and so forth.
Telefónica?
To name but one.
Maybe not in the UK market, but certainly in Spain and Latin America. We have a huge global IT services business.
Absolutely. And so maybe the analogy, part of the analogy with IoT is certainly on that enterprise side of things. Part of it is consumer with connected home and connected dog trackers and whatever you might want to connect. But a large part of it is complex enterprise-related stuff, and actually telcos are pretty good at that kind of stuff.
Yeah, fair comment.
Okay, let's talk about mobile and cellular now then. Right? And the question is, what is going to happen? We've been talking about 2G, GPRS, which is still being used, and we're talking also about IoT across so-called 4G, LTE, and so on. Does that leave 3G out in the cold completely, do you think?
No, I don't think so. Certainly not at the moment. I mean, if you're looking, like most large companies are, at a global service where they're operating in many different countries, then there is still very much a place for 3G. But I mean, I think we can all see that as LTE evolves into the new standards, specifically the ones which have been designed particularly for machine-to-machine, and we're just at the first point in time when those standards for machine-to-machine are really going to be launched in the networks. Up until now, we've used the same kind of bearer services that have been designed for consumer applications. So, with Category 1, Category M, and narrowband IoT that William had a huge part to play in, we're starting to see the first specialist technologies offering low power, huge coverage, low cost chipsets, and that's going to be a huge transformation. But no, I think 3G has a role to play, and as an operator, we have to help our customers choose the right technology for the time scale, for the geographic location, and for their particular application. It's still true, about 70% of the connections we see on our networks today are using GSM or GPRS, cellular machine-to-machine, which really points towards the huge demand for low bit rate, low cost chipsets and services. And that's what we're investing in. So we'll start to see those investments. You see it in the US already. You start to see Category 1 chipsets at $14, I think AT&T are offering it for in the USA, Verizon. And you'll see a lower price point in Category M and Category M2 coming forward. So no, the 3G has a role to play, but it will diminish over time, I certainly agree.
No, I think 3G is dead in the medium term, to be perfectly honest. It kind of falls between two stools, right? 2G provides you coverage, 4G provides you capacity, increasingly narrowband IoT will provide coverage. So 3G, it's a sort of temporary solution to a problem. Same with traditional handsets and so on. In certain markets, without LTE deployed to a great extent, then maybe you're relying on 3G as a fallback. But realistically, it's not probably going to last for the next 5 years. So we've done some.
I think it will last longer than that. If you think about automotive, if you want to launch a car today in a global market, you cannot rely, as you say, on LTE being present in all the countries you want to ship in, and that will start to diminish, and LTE will start to come up. But I think it's got a lifetime longer than 5 years.
But we hear from a. Okay, so traditionally, most of the operators who are talking about turning off different generations are turning off 2G, right? AT&T, the operators in Singapore, the operators in Australia, this is all coming through. But the first noises from European operators actually is about turning off 3G. Telenor Norway said turning off 3G in 2020, and then we'll keep 2G until 2025. I've had similar conversations with other operators about this kind of thing. So my feel for it within Europe is actually 3G first, and then and 2G will be maintained for smart metering and for roaming as well, voice roaming, which is a very valuable market.
I certainly think that's true in Europe. Absolutely agree. Yeah, that's the way it's going to go.
We've mentioned enterprise. We've talked a lot about the consumer end of things. I want to wrap this up now because I want to get some questions from the floor if people want to ask questions. So the last question I'm going to put to you as a panel is this. What about security? There's a great deal of debate, and I speak to a lot of people about this, and there's a great deal of concern about the data and the amount of data and the sort of data that's going across IoT devices, machine to machine, and into various databases, data centers, and so on. And people are concerned about what's going to happen to that data and how it might affect or impinge on them as individual human beings. What's your take on that? I don't know who'd like to start first, but
I mean, it's a hugely important topic and a very hot issue. Having seen hacks in the press and penetrations going on, and it's really important from a system design perspective that right the way from the device to the connectivity through the IT system and the surroundings of the user management, that's all properly designed at the start, and then any potential attacks are detected and you have means to respond to that. So design is hugely important. In terms of protecting data itself, I don't really see there's much specific technology required for IoT. Those IT systems and IT technologies are well established, and systems to maintain security in data centers, in cloud-hosted applications, access and users, that's actually quite a well-worn path. It's the bit about securing the device, making sure the communications are secure, authenticating the device to the network, and also increasingly where you're dealing with critical infrastructure like elevators, for example, making sure the device knows it's talking to the right endpoint and it cannot be controlled by something else. And you need to build additional levels of security beyond that which is available from the network operators. You have to properly think about the problem to install it. But I think the actual data protection bit and the use of the data, I mean, who owns the data, how is the data used? Generally, these things are in private pools and they're for exploitation of the customer who extracts it. So generally, they are not actually shared and available. The exception is perhaps smart cities, where you see platforms for sharing data, for being able to create mashups, being able to exchange information, to create a more value for the end customer.
But often in those environments, so I'll answer the question in a little bit and let William go first. But in the smart city environment, often the motivation is not making money or keeping that data as private. The data is supposed to be public data, and so there isn't such a security limitation on it. Bus timetable information, or when the buses are arriving. Okay, you want it to be read-only, but beyond that, it doesn't really matter who gets access to it. So that as an exception, it's a good one. Sorry.
So, of course, it's really important, and Weightless has the same level of security as Cellular built into it right from the start, and nobody's ever successfully hacked into a cellular system at the wireless level. But if you look at the security breaches, it tends to be some disgruntled employee giving access to the database at some central point. So you can't prevent that. But my general point on this is, if you're worried about security around the Internet of Things, then surely you're worried about security around the Internet. Why don't you turn off the Internet? Well, nobody would do that because it's so useful for their everyday lives. In the same way, we happily share our data with Tesco via a club card, including quite intimate things about what we've bought that week. Because we've come to the conclusion the benefits are greater than the downsides, and we built some trust in that entity that they're not going to suddenly publish all our data on how many sanitary products we might have bought that week or how much alcohol we've drunk that month, because they wouldn't, because it's not in their best interest. And we just need to build the same degree of faith and the same awareness of the benefits of the Internet of Things, and that will happen slowly over time as we go through this process.
We'll have to leave it there, gentlemen. Really good stuff from all of you. Thank you very much indeed. It's an absolute pleasure as usual. Thank you. So, your panel.